This week, we are talking about the movie Megalopolis, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Dale got an exclusive screening of this movie last year, so he's going to talk to us about this film, and then we're going to talk about the reviews, the production, and all of that afterwards. So,
Yeah, I had the opportunity to get a chance to be invited to attend the screening for the movie. I think last May or June, I'm not sure. But yeah, fun experience seeing an advanced screening for a movie. I think the movie poster was supposed to premiere later on that year as well. And his friends for Coppola, so I was hype. So he was also there. He spoke to us for a while. I'm not gonna deny, it's visually stunning. Getting blown away. We talk about art, an auteur-driven picture, which is visually engaging. As all that stuff gives you stuff to look at. It's clear his attention to detail on the visual side, top notch. Could not be beaten in that movie at all, but the story was structurally lacking to me, and that was the biggest glaring issue I have with the movie. And it's hard. You want more auteur driven movies, but you also want at least the story to be streamlined. At least people complain about The Irishman being too long. At least it was still structured in a way. So even you're sitting down there for 3 hours watching Irishman over, COVID on Netflix. I mean, at least the story was still progressing in a proper way. In this movie, it seems like story was secondary. The length of time you have between concept to production of a project kind of tells you the difficulty that's not really viable on a certain level. I mean, because he was trying to make this movie from he had the idea for it in 1977, and he actively started developing it in 1983. That's a long time. And the budget for this movie was 120 million, but there are reports that that's not really the true budget because ballooning costs. Because during production here in Atlanta for the movie, he would constantly they would constantly do a bunch of reshoots on the fly because he'd have different ideas thrown into it in the middle of shooting. In the trailer, I think there's a clip of Adam Driver stopping time on top of the Empire State Building. That really doesn't come into play into the rest of the movie. There's a scene Ed and him and that's his time stop powers is how him and Natalie Emanuel get together. She's driving by because she's the mayor's daughter, who is Giancarlo Esposito, and she sees him stop time and she becomes intrigued by him, and then she meets him at a club and they form a relationship. And Giancarlo really hates the idea of the young upstart because he's he's a nephew of one of the city's largest financial backers, which is kind of ironic because we know how the Coppolas work in the entertainment world. All of them have jobs. Jason Schwartzman's at Coppola; he constantly finds roles as well. But and then through it is oh, it becomes this weird allegory for new uprising creativity against a staunch old guard, but the story is really not there. Then you have the background of him mourning his former wife, his dead wife, him having undocumented fling, I guess, with Aubrey Plaza's character, and Aubrey Plaza's character is also in cahoots and in a relationship with John Voight, who is the head of the bank, who's about to die, and Shia LaBeouf is his son, and he wants to take over, and Shia LaBeouf and Aubrey Plaza, who at this point Aubrey Plaza is his stepmom, they enter a sexual relationship. Then somewhere Shia LaBeouf tries to take over the city. It's a lot of incoherent stuff kind of thrown together, which sucks. And that was that. And if you read every review coming out of the movie, everybody also mentions how wonderful the visuals are, but the story is the weakest part of the thing. And I think that's why I think a lot of American distributors, because let's be honest, American film goers honestly on a whole don't really like auteur-driven pictures, and I think that's why post Cannes is having a large time getting American distributors like Germany, France, Europe. All the European distributors are picking it up because that's the bag they like in Europe. It's different here. Yeah, it's gonna be a tough. I think he said they want to release this movie in IMAX, which it'll look amazing in IMAX visually. But the story is probably the weakest part. I feel bad for him because he sold off his winery and stuff like that, stuff that would continue to build him generational in his family revenue for this project. And I don't think this project's going to do that well cinematically. It might end up being one of the biggest flops of his career as a director, which is tough to say because it's Francis Ford Coppola.
according to Aubrey Plaza, she spoke positively about Coppola's willingness to experiment. The whole day would change, and you never knew from day to day what your filming schedule would be like. And other people on the film described that approach as exasperating, and that Coppola was hesitant to decide how the film world should look. So one crew member recalled that he would often show up in the mornings before these big sequences, and because no plan had been put in place, and because he wouldn't allow his collaborators to put a plan in place, he would often just sit in his trailer for hours on end, wouldn't talk to anyone, and was often smoking marijuana. And then he'd come out and whip up something that didn't make sense and that didn't follow anything anyone had spoken about or anything that was on the page. And everyone just had to go along with it and try to make the best out of it.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's the reason why the story doesn't make any sense. I mean, the thing is, like, when you're filming something, an actor might have a good idea, or you might have a good idea that you want to incorporate into the film that you hadn't rehearsed or wasn't written before, and like that does happen. But if that's your just like standard of like how you're gonna make it, where it's just like, let's just go with the flow and see what happens, you're definitely gonna go over budget for one, and then two, like everyone's gonna be confused and not knowing like what they're supposed to be doing.
He also fired like the FX team during the original initial shooting of the movie, like in I think December of December 2022. Like he fired them. So even the one I saw was still being tweaked by a new FX team. Like in the one I saw, he even said because they're changing the effects, a lot of it was a lot of previous footage, and like a lot of times when you're editing, you do a lot of drop-ins to say, okay, this is here for right now, but it's going to replace something different. Between changing sets constantly, that means people's hours have gone up, actors' hours have gone up. Then firing your visual effects team, and then hiring a new one. Which, yeah, it's not a good working environment.
Since '83, when you actually started to work on this, it does seem insane that at this point in 2022 you're still changing things and not having something nailed down. It's very weird. I don't get how you can still not have like a focus of like what you're trying to do, especially as such a seasoned filmmaker. It seems kind of insane to me that like you wouldn't have a plan. Variety said that this movie was Francis Ford Coppola's bold, ungainly epic that crams in half a dozen stars and decades worth of ideas. The Guardian called it mega bloated and mega boring, and Time Magazine called it messy, self-indulgent, and glorious. I saw some other reviews from like Deadline and The Hollywood Reporter that were like pretty positive. So I don't know. I'm kind of getting the vibe that people are like, yeah, it's kind of a mess, but it's Coppola, so we're gonna go with it. Or maybe like the visual effects were so captivating that like maybe you didn't care about story.
Or the 7-minute standing ovation for this movie, and then there were boos, also, or groans mixed in with it, with as far as Megalopolis. But then we also see a lot of critics like, yeah, this movie's not that good, and most of the positive reviews are all highlighting the visual side of the movie.
The industry will probably protect it because it's a Francis Ford Coppola film, but for normal moviegoers, I don't know how it will play. This movie is very similar to Babylon in terms of like a visual spectacle, but it was kind of messy. And I feel like that movie, I feel like it actually flopped. I don't know how normal people are going to come to this movie if they'll feel incentivized to do so. The auteur-driven movies aren't like the movies that are doing well in the box office because they're not like IP films or attached to a big franchise. So for people who love film like us, having auteur-driven movies are great. It's like a great thing that they're like back in theaters and not just like being on streaming. And I don't even know if people should go see this movie. It kind of sounds like a mess.
But I do think streaming is probably the only way this movie would actually get an audience to actually decide that they want to view it. Because like I was talking with people before, like online, like, oh yeah, Francis Ford Coppola. This, like, they saw the teaser, oh, this thing looks fire, blah, blah. And then I was like, I kept telling people, I don't know, don't get your expectations up. And then after all, like, the reviews and stuff came out, like, oh, yeah, damn, you were right. And I was like, yeah. Did you like that clip? Well, you can listen to the entire podcast because the 16mm Film Crew podcast is available on all major podcast platforms.